This is Comic Geek Speak, episode 1736, Top 5 MCU Movies.
Laser beams, opinions like the seasons on everything you read in comics, movies, games, toys, artists, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek Speak, Comic Geek, uniting the world's mightiest heroes. This is...
I'm Shane Kelly.
I'm Kevin Moyer.
I'm Ian Levinstein.
I'm Matt.
And I'm Chris Everly.
Yeah.
Welcome.
This episode is a long time coming, brothers. A long time coming.
I'm going to make it really easy. All of them, it's one story. They're good.
Good night, everybody.
That's it.
Ian, I love how you channeled pants right there for a moment, by the way. That was
Well, I'm wearing them, so it's easy.
The whole late night approach.
There you go.
Good to have everybody back with us again. And
yes, good to be part again.
All right. And we'll try to get Murd's top 5 on our next comic talk,
absolutely.
Since he's unable to join us this evening.
Yeah.
But it's another top 5 episode, and you know what that means. We list top 5 with possible top 6s or 7s.
Well, that's nice.
And as we were discussing off the air, this was a hell of a difficult top 5 to assemble.
Oh, yeah.
I struggle with this list.
Yeah, it's hard to narrow it down, man.
Yeah. At
You
this
gotta
point, it really
start
is.
picking it. Like you really got to start fine combing it. Because it's the only way you can try to at least get some sort of segregation to get it to the top 5.
Yeah.
And then I'm in the minority here. I'd say about number 10 is where I was like, where would I put the ones? The bottom 5 were easy. The first 8, 9 were easy. Then in between there is where I start to stumble.
Yeah.
Well, and part of my top 5 to 10 are the ones that I rewatch most often, more or less.
Yeah.
That's really what I had to gauge it by.
Yeah, it's easy for me to start going from favorites to least favorites, but to narrow it down to 5 is where it really gets it gets difficult.
My hardest is going to be number 1 because I was saying off air to Chris before we were recording here that I've always said a certain movie as my number 1, and I have to think about that when we get there. So that's a little bit of a preview for what's upcoming.
Oh, you sneaky guy.
Now, quick question here. So the end of the Infinity Saga is actually going to be with Spider-Man Far From Home.
Yes.
Is there any
Correct.
chance that that movie will reach anyone's top 5, or is this basically the official?
No, I think there's a chance it might, because I'm excited for Mysterio, and I'm curious to see what they do. If part of my head thinks that this whole quote alternate universe thing, because a breach happened, isn't real, that it's all Mysterio faking it.
Well, that's a good point, Shane.
That even Nick Fury and Maria Hill won't be real, that it's all his doing.
Yeah.
It's the chameleon, I'm telling you.
Hey, why not?
Well, you never know. You never know.
Shane, that's a great theory.
I hope you're right, Shane. Honestly, I do. So.
Yeah. And yeah, it's possible it might make it there. I don't think it's going to for me, but you never know. But I guess if it does, we'll have to make an addendum later on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Either way, it won't be in my top 5. I'll guarantee you that.
Yeah. And of course, I'll mention before we get going here, there will probably be some light spoilers for the movies that we're discussing here.
Well, and I probably should have said that before talking about Spider-Man 2 with the trailer for those who didn't see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fine. It was in the trailer. It's fine. We're good. We're fine. But
Exactly.
But yeah. So if you don't want to know anything about any of these movies, then don't listen to this episode. But if you do, it's the right movie. It's the right one for you.
Just to remind listeners about how we do these. So for each number, we'll go do a round table and mention what our number 5 is, for example. Then we'll go back to the first person. They'll give a brief summary of why they chose that particular film.
Yep. All right. Let's go ahead and begin with number 5. And Chris, how about you go first?
All right, my number 5 is the first Avengers film.
Okay. Kevin?
Mine is Doctor Strange.
Oh.
Nice. Matt?
I concur with Chris. First Avenger.
Okay. Shane?
Mine's the first Guardians of the Galaxy.
And mine is the first Guardians of the Galaxy.
Oh, we got some overlap here, gentlemen.
Wow.
Yep. All right, Chris, go ahead.
All right, so again, as I said, I struggle with this list, especially for the lower numbers. Well, I mean, for the like 4 and 5 especially, and I settled on Avengers because Avengers was the moment when I started to really see, all right, the vision they had for this universe, no pun intended, and I started to get the real sense of, wow, they're really going to start to go all the way with this. That they're not just doing, scattershot, well-made films. They're going to try to build the Marvel universe in film. And the way they captured the key characters, their interactions, the dynamic, everything was so right from the spirit of the comics. The movie was. I remember when we all went to see that movie together. Most of us were together when we saw that. It was when I was doing one of my conventions, and I just remember the electricity in the air in that theater, the excitement we all felt to actually see, essentially the Avengers come to life in a film with live action. And the fact that it worked was so thrilling. And again, I'll end my brief statement with this. But what really made the movie transcend to get it to that top 5 was when they showed Thanos at the end. And then I remember sitting in my seat going, like taking my breath in and going, wow, they're really going to do this. They're going to bring frickin' Thanos into all of this. And that's when I knew more than ever that we were on the verge now of experiencing something really special and unique. So that's why I had to put the first Avengers as my number 5.
Oh, okay. Then I have to backtrack it for a little bit. I thought you said the first Avenger, as in Captain America.
Okay.
Avenger?
So you are not in concurrence.
No. I heard the first Avenger, and that's how I have it written here. I was like, oh, okay.
All right, so switch.
Switch. I forgot what order we went in.
No. Okay, Kevin, you're up.
I'm up. All right, whatever. I'll miss another cue. Doctor Strange, for me, when I remember seeing the first teaser out of it, and of course seeing the window out of the Sanctum Sanctorum, I was just like, it gave me a little chill, and I was like, man, if they do this, this is going to be, one of those attempts to do something with a character that is not obviously mainstream, but if they do it well, this movie's going to really, really, have a lot of potential to be a very enjoyable, exciting, and successful film. And when I saw the first trailer and I saw the they started showing some of the alternate dimensions, and I was just like, they got it. They nailed it. And I'm like, all the movies I go see, I see in 2D, just a digital. I don't see 3D. I don't see, the IMAX versions. I only do that if a movie that I feel is worthwhile to experience for some reason, like a Godzilla movie or something like that, and when I saw that trailer, I was like, I have to see this Doctor Strange movie in IMAX and possibly in 3D, because I just like, this is such a visual, compelling film, as well as, a superhero story. I was like, that's the feeling I got from it. And then I went to see it, and I freaking loved every minute of it. It was unique. It captured all the essence of a character that I used to love, interacting with Spider-Man when I was, reading comics, and all the other characters. And it just captured the whole nuance and, the essence of that character, and put it on the film, just like all the other successful Marvel MCU films. It was so straight with the character, and they just nailed it, and I loved it. So
That's a great point, Kevin, because I had the same reaction that when I went to see Doctor Strange, I was so happy when I left the theater. I had this huge, loopy grin on my face because, like you said, they did not cut any corners. It was Doctor Strange.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And I give him real props for that.
It was as trippy as I was hoping it would be.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to watch, I remember reading those stories, and especially when he used to team up with Spider-Man, going into the dimensions and, with the Wanda Watum and all that kind of stuff. And it was just so trippy and fun. And I was like, wow, if they, and Ditko was just, he created all those visual, dimensions, and they were so compelling, and with his artistic ability and style. And I'm like, man, if they capitalize on this, they're going to nail it. And they did.
Yeah.
Yep. Good pick.
My favorite effect in that, I think, was still pushing the spirit out of the body,
the astral.
Form, yeah. Yep, that was fantastic. All right,
I like when he was floating in the dark dimension. That was just so visually amazing.
That was great.
Yeah.
All right, Matt, with your correction.
Sure. Well, first, I like they picked the perfect director to do the movie. I think The Rocketeer is highly underrated.
Yes,
and I love what he did with The Rocketeer, Joe Johnston. And then with him, the fact that he did it again for the first Avenger, I felt like he just completely copied that feel. So I felt like I was in that era. I liked how, and I guess I've heard since that Joss Whedon did a treatment over to kind of get things ready for Avengers. So I don't know if it was him or the initial writers, but that's the first time I started being in the past. You could see a little bit of hints of foreshadowing in the future, like the Human Torch was back there.
Yes.
I think, was it Vita Rays? So I liked how they tied in some things that when you're watching as a fan, you go, oh, wait a minute, I know that they incorporate that in there. It also, I remember just, harking back to a conversation about Endgame that Kevin and I had before this movie even came out, when they announced that Chris Evans was going to be Captain America. And I kept thinking of him as the Human Torch. I kept thinking of him as not another teen movie. And I was like, I just see this guy in like goofy roles. How is he going to pull this off? And I exited the theater thinking, that's Captain America. I just need to see him in Avengers yet to be completely convinced. And to me, even though Robert Downey Jr. is kind of like the face of the MCU, Captain America was always the key. That if you were not buying him, you're not buying the Avengers. And if you can't buy the Avengers, then everything else afterward is just going to be the DCEU. And that's just how I always, DCEU wasn't the thing at the time, but I just knew that this whole experiment wasn't going to work.
Right.
But they convinced me. I liked the look of it, the feel, and it there was just something about it that was an amazing story. I don't know, amazing, but really good story.
Yeah, it was a very sound story, and I think that's my number 6 actually, and I think that they did. I'm glad they went back to World War II, and
yes,
and the whole movie was World War II. It was a period piece, and they, like you said, they had all those little Easter egg nuances things, and they really nailed it. And I totally agree with you about Joe Johnston. That was a very smart choice.
Yeah,
and go ahead, Matt. I'm sorry.
When they announced Captain America, and I thought, all I want is for them to find him frozen, go back to World War II, and then end with him waking up in some fashion. And they could not have hit it more perfectly.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Funny thing is, like the original, the scene where he woke up at the end was an after film thing.
Yeah,
that was not the original ending of the movie.
Really? Oh yeah. Yeah. No. I forget what the original film version was, but yes, you're right. It was very different.
Yeah, they went back and reshot that scene right before the movie released into theaters. That Times Square scene. So.
Well, it worked. And by the way, what I loved about that's one of my favorite of all of the sort of the Marvel origin films, because it so perfectly captures the character. And like you said, Chris Evans for me is really one of the great stars of all these actors, because in many ways he had the most difficult role, because Captain America become, unless it's done just right.
Yeah.
And they show growth in the character, which I'll talk about more with some other selections.
Yeah.
He comes off as silly and it's hard to take seriously. He so clearly understands the nuances of Steve Rogers, and he just nailed it. For me, I love the movie. The moment they had him being beaten up by the bullies in the alley, and he picks up the lid of the metal garbage can and holds it up as a shield, I remember thinking, oh, okay, they have it. This is going to be great. And also we should point out, how great is Sebastian Stan as Bucky?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, perfectly cast, and they so got that character's right in the
not only them, but Stanley Tucci, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I as Erskine, man, I thought he was phenomenal, and I loved his scenes with Steve. You know, it really made it more personable, and it was like it was like they elaborated on, that relationship, which wasn't, very, wasn't elaborated on much in the comics, but they gave it heart.
They sure
That's
did.
a great point, because they show Erskine as a German who had defected from the Nazis.
Right.
And that scene where they're sitting on the beds in the barracks.
Yeah, I love that scene.
Steve is just like, well, I hate bullies.
And of course, Haley Atwell's Peggy. I mean, that became one of my favorite performances in the entire MCU period from her continuing to show up. She really gave personality to the character and built upon her appearances each time she showed up.
Man, I miss Agent Carter.
Yeah,
I think there's a line in that movie that I think about a lot, where it's where he says, people forget that the Nazis invaded Germany first, and when you think about it, you're like, yeah, it kind of, their country, then they spread out from there. That was my one regret is, I guess maybe it would have been too much of a third rail if they would have used more of the Nazis, and then just, I mean, at this point, is there anyone really who doesn't see them as villains, type of thing?
No,
so
but I
think
think
they did a Hydra subset.
Yeah, I think they did the smart thing, though. I mean, they connected it with it, but didn't dwell on it. And that was it was kind of a safe way to tread, but it worked. Well,
because they wanted to show that Hydra, as strange as it may sound, was even worse than the Nazis. Yeah, and like the Nazis had spawned like this even more horrible, malignant cancer, so to speak, in the manifestation of the Red Skull. So
yeah.
Like go ahead.
I was just going to say, if they wouldn't have linked, the Red Skull and Hydra as that science division of the Nazis, and just like tried to eliminate any connection to Nazis and just made it that, I think it would have been, very flat.
Yeah.
But,
yes, absolutely.
But they were very smart, and they did it very well.
Before I pass the baton, I just have one more quick question, because I've gotten into discussions with this on people on DC websites or forums. Is Wonder Woman not just basically the first Avenger? The movie, Wonder Woman.
Oh, yeah.
Movie.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It absolutely is.
Because if you give a brief synopsis of both movies using very generalizations, you can't tell which movie you're talking about. But I have some people that are convinced that it's a completely different movie. It has nothing. It's not really that comparable to First Avenger.
It has a lot of the same beats.
Right away.
Yeah, it has a lot of the same beats to it, and I mean, they definitely build upon what worked there to make it work with Wonder Woman. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Foundationally, they're very similar.
Yeah. Plus, I'll also mention we came very close to officially having the first appearance of Captain America be in the ice in the original end scene for the Incredible Hulk movie.
That's right.
Which was a cut scene which you can find on the Blu-ray. So, yep.
I think he tries to commit suicide, and it starts an avalanche after he hulks out.
Yep.
And you see the ice rolling.
Yep.
And you see a quick glimpse of Cap.
Yep.
Oh, get out.
Yeah, there's like a silhouetted figure in the ice when it's avalanching. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
Glad they didn't do that.
Yeah. Thank God. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
All right, Shane.
All right, Guardians. Well, when this came out, I had almost zero interest to see it. Not because I thought it would be bad. I mean, it was fairly early on in Marvel stuff. I want to say it was one of the first 8 or so. And part of that's because I knew nothing about any of the characters really. I mean, I knew who they were, but I really never read much of anything about the Guardians of the Galaxy. And for me, I took the boys to see it. It was summer vacation for them, and it blew me away. Not so much the story, because it was the downtrodden kind of criminals becoming heroes, which, okay, that's fine. It was more how visually spectacular it was and the music behind it.
Oh, the
that
music
really,
is so key.
Really pulled me in. I think those characters have a lot of room to grow, and I think they should do something else with them as time goes on. But that movie was, after watching everything that led up to that, that was almost to me like a palate cleansing comedy that made me laugh and forget of all this, kind of not forget, but put on the back burner all the serious stuff that was going on in the MCU to get to this part, be out in space, which I love sci-fi space stuff. And I again, the way that all the effects were done when they're flying in the Milano, when they're on, oh my God, Nova Corps' home planet. God, Xandar. Yeah. And they're fighting against Ronan's airships that are coming down. Just it just looked as real as you could possibly get, more so than some other things I think that were up to that point. It just blew me away with how visually spectacular that movie was, and to have all the music from the 70s in the background and almost being such an integral part of the story for the songs that they played at the right times that meant something for what was going on in the action. I just thought it was very well crafted. And I was just blown away that something that was coming out from Marvel could surprise me after seeing everything else that we'd seen, that it just took me by surprise. I really did not think I'd like that movie at all.
Yeah.
You got to give major props to James Gunn for following his vision and setting all that up. I mean, kudos to him.
Oh, I mean, one of the reasons why I had it on my list, Shane, is the fact that it was so different than everything we'd had so far, and it was our first real, spacefaring adventure in the MCU. So that's what works so well for it for me, and the humor that he injected into it, and the personality of each character, and the fact that he made a talking raccoon seem not ridiculous.
Yeah, I really thought I'd have more of a problem with that it just wouldn't work. The same with Groot. I thought, well, how interesting can that be? It was fantastic.
Yeah,
and that's
really
also
was
a tribute to the performances of Bradley Cooper and Vin Diesel in those voice roles.
Yeah, I forget how many I Am Groots he recorded in different tones just so they could play around with it.
Would you say the biggest stars in that movie at the time were Bradley Cooper and Vin Diesel, and you basically just hear their voice?
Yeah,
I would say so.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and since then, I mean, Zoe Saldana has become a bigger star, and obviously, Chris Pratt has become everything essentially. But yeah, they were definitely the biggest stars in there.
Let's not go ahead, Shane. I'm sorry.
I was actually surprised Bradley Cooper did it, given all the other things he was involved with at the time. Not that I thought he'd snob it, turn his nose up at it or anything. I'm continuously surprised by the actors they get to portray these characters.
Well, and I think that lends to the credibility of it all. Is that I think that's why they get the big name actors and they get the people that are intrigued by it, because number one, what they've established with this whole universe, and two, they're so true to the characters, and they write compelling stories, and whatever they do that they want to be a part of it.
Yeah. And anything they change still makes it interesting for us who may know more about the characters in general, but it still works. It's not like it's out of place or against the grain completely. It just fits into this universe they've created.
Yeah.
And Shane, you made a great point in that when Guardians came out, and when I experienced it and I loved it, I have to mention how great Dave Bautista is, by the way, as Drax, and how they interpret that character. But also, you realize after this movie, like, okay, they can do pretty much anything now, because they took a property that the average person knows nothing about whatsoever.
Yeah.
And he took the characters and he took that aspect of the Marvel Universe, and he made it work in such a way that, I mean, it was a huge success, and we can't understate the importance of the 70s music in that film.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was so key.
Yeah. And also, last thing I'll say is that I was actually surprised they showed Thanos in that film, as they did, But even though it was a small scene, but they still took the moment to just kind of let the audience know, because the average person doesn't even know who Thanos is outside of geeks like ourselves. And those little things, they just reminded us, like, okay, this character is the big bad, and we're just showing you a little glimpse of him right now. But the way they had the other characters react to him, like, okay, this person's going to cause real problems down the road for our heroes. Yeah. And I'm glad that there's a nice little moment just to remind you, like, the larger stakes that are starting to take shape, basically, in this universe.
And that was the first time Josh Brolin played him, correct?
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah. Which is also why his face looks so different than it did in Avengers, but that's beside the point. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I actually had no interest in seeing this movie, but I'm trying to word this nicely. An ex-girlfriend of somebody on the show who worked with my wife at the time told her how good of a movie it was. So since she wanted to see it, I was like, all right, we'll go. And I actually prefer the second one more because I like Kurt Russell, but I seem to be in the minority of people who wouldn't even put this movie in their top 10 in the MCU. There's some things I thought were okay, but with Phase 2, I liked some of the other tones that were going on at the time. I just thought this was going in a different direction that I didn't care for as much as the other ones that were coming out in Phase 2.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
All right.
Everybody's entitled to their opinion.
Yep.
Yeah.
So my number 5 was also Guardians of the Galaxy. So instead, I'm going to talk about Black Panther. Because that was my number 6, and I'm going to just go ahead and make that my number 5 since we just talked about it. Black Panther was a revelation for me. They had to do the story right. And my God, did they do it right, and more so. They built Wakanda into a realistic feeling civilization, almost like the way that if they had ever done the Savage Land in the X-Men movies, I feel like it would have been a very similar aspect to that, like basically a place that no one knows about, that's right in front of your nose, that's been there the entire time, that has grown and evolved into its own living existence essentially, and that's what Wakanda is. And they built the character of T'Challa way more so than we got in his introduction in Civil War, as should have been the case. And just in general, what Michael B. Jordan brought to the table as a villain, just it leaps and bounds above what I was expecting out of Killmonger, and just really, like, he was a believable character. He had a personality and a depth to his existence that brought him both as a villain and as a sympathetic character that I really wanted to see, and they drove that home perfectly. While the special effects could have been better at times, for the most part, outside of the fight scenes, I think they did a really good job of building the world and the universe there. And every single actor that they threw at us was a joy. The fact that we had so many famous black actors in this movie, just blew my mind how many they were able to get. Again, Chadwick Boseman, Michael B. Jordan, Lupita Nyong'o, Letitia Wright, Forrest Whitaker, yes, Daniel Kaluuya, Angela Bassett, Winston Duke. Everybody is fantastic. Sterling K. Brown. Sterling K. Brown is a rising star in so many ways, and has been for years, and he still is. And Andy Serkis as Claw was great as well. And then throwing in Everett K. Ross as the token, just absolutely worked for me. So overall it was a fantastic movie, and it deserves to be on my list somewhere. So might as well be here.
Yeah, it was a great movie.
I'll talk more about Black Panther later.
Okay. All right. Here we are with our number 4. And Matt, go ahead and start us off.
Number 4 for me is Infinity War.
Okay. My number 4 is Captain America Winter Soldier. Shane.
Mine is Civil War.
Okay. Kevin.
My number 4 is Avengers: Age of Ultron.
And Chris.
My number 4 is the first Iron Man film.
Nice. All right, Mac, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm trying to think of something fresh I could say about Infinity War. I just liked, it's the big one before the big one. I like to see how, when you watch Phase 1, the primary characters, to see where they are now. In this one, it was just interesting over the time frame. Going back to Doctor Strange, I thought Doctor Strange was pretty good. And then when I saw him in this movie, I was like, oh my God, I can't wait to see the sequel. They got to do a sequel now. I think some of the solo characters, such as Spider-Man, I cared for less in their solo movies than I did in this group one. And I think that's I give credit to the Russos as well as the writers. I found it more interesting. I really liked how they broke up the who's interacting with who, like Thor and the Guardians. I thought was an interesting interaction, and everyone that wound up on Titan, and then everyone else in Wakanda. So and then you have kind of Bruce Banner coming back, and so he's kind of getting to know people for the first time that he missed during Civil War. So in a way, he was kind of into seeing how these guys are going to interact for the first time. Or I guess that's for the first time, because at this point, some of the characters had already interacted with each other, so they knew who they were. Like Rhodey knew who T'Challa was, but Banner didn't. So even though those guys had, I'm assuming, some type of a connection, relationship, now we're being brought in just like Bruce is. Well, what's kind of the status and stuff like that. So that's going to make my number 4.
Yeah, it really is an excellent movie, and I mean, again, with that last scene, just it takes your breath away. It really does.
For me, one of the greatest accomplishments of that film is Josh Brolin's performance as Thanos.
Yeah.
Because Thanos, as we all know, is a very complicated character in this comic history, and obviously they couldn't. They kind of changed his motivation. I understand why they did, because in the comic he was worshiping death and trying to prove his love, and I like the modification that they did. But I think Brolin really captured both the grandeur and just like the terrifying grandeur of Thanos, and really how almost virtually unbeatable the character is, and also sort of that sinister demigod aspect of the character as well. Masterfully done.
Yeah. I'm actually. I thought it was interesting how well of a performance he did. There's people who actually are, audience members who are like, he has a point with what he was planning to do. So the fact that he was kind of, just like with Killmonger, you had people that were, he's not completely wrong. This is another villain that Marvel was able to put out there that had enough weight to him that you even though theoretically they're the villain, you have people that are like, I can't say he's doing the wrong thing or his mindset is necessarily wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, he's talking about the perils of overpopulation.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, there is some basis of reality of that, and I think that I think by changing the direction, from the comic into that direction, I mean, it changed the whole dynamic of the character, really, because you could empathize with his perspective, but then also it made you morally, question, the whole motive and obviously, the execution of it all. But
yeah,
and I thought that made him a very sympathetic, character, so that way you could at least understand his motivation and somewhat, buy into it to some level. But then, you didn't obviously want to happen what happened either. So it's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
Yep. So I went with Captain America: Winter Soldier with my number 4, which just proves that this list is so fluid that depending on the day of the week, it could be something higher or lower. But I'm putting it at 4 for now. What grabs me about this is that it takes the best aspects of Ed Brubaker's amazing comic book run, and just merges it with the sensibilities and style that had been established in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, while at the same time also crafting something that's almost like a spy thriller.
Oh, absolutely.
Like this is like Bond-esque action at times. where you're left with mystery and intrigue and action. And this was easily my favorite Black Widow performance.
Without question.
Yes, without a doubt.
Oh yeah, I mean she does an amazing job in this, Scarlett Johansson, and plus the big Bucky reveal and everything in this is well done. Nick Fury is remarkably excellent in this, and when you see the reveal of the eye, and he uses that to get into the computer system and everything, lights out fantastic. I completely love everything about this film in many, many different ways, and it would be 3 or 2 probably next week, but today it's number 4. And the first Russo's film on my list, and the first Russo film that they did in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I'm glad they stuck around.
Well, and it's actually my number 3, and I like it for also what it gives you for the Hydra, for the continuation of that villain rearing its ugly head yet again.
Yep. In
such a subtle, clever way that I never thought in my wildest dreams would have happened that way.
Oh, absolutely, and it was earth shattering. I mean, to have Hail Hydra spoken that way, and to as well, to see that essentially the entire foundation of S.H.I.E.L.D. is a foundation of lies, was just a brilliant step that I never expected them to do in the cinematic universe. And it, the ramifications could have been felt a little bit more in future movies, but at the same time, gave us one of my favorite moments in Endgame. And my God, that elevator scene is best damn fight in the entire cinematic universe, period, right there.
Well, I did like that it kind of gave you an idea how blurry the lines are between what Hydra wanted and what S.H.I.E.L.D. essentially wanted.
Yep.
And it was, this isn't freedom, it's fear, I think is the line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I liked how in the marketing, I think at one of the cons, might have been San Diego, where somebody just asked about the Winter Soldier, and they were basically, we're not hiding who the Winter Soldier is. That's not the, that's not the, I guess the big thing in this whole movie is who's really the Winter Soldier, when either you knew or there was enough there in the previews for you to understand who it was going to be if you didn't read the comics. So I like the fact that wasn't really the focal point of the movie. Yeah. And Ragnarok is further down on my list, a lot further down. But how that movie intertwined a Thor story, and then you also had Planet Hulk. Looking back, Winter Soldier did the same, where it's a Captain America story, but it also has Nick Fury versus S.H.I.E.L.D. in there as well.
Yeah.
So this might be the closest we get to having an actual Nick Fury movie. So I like the way that was presented to us as well.
And the Secret Warriors series as well is very much implemented into there, and that's one of my favorite Marvel series. Period. That Hickman wrote years ago. So it was nice to see aspect of that. Yep.
Well, I'm still sticking to the fact that now, especially with these alternate timelines possible and all that stuff, that I'm still sticking with the David Hasselhoff. That's still possible. So I'm still holding out.
Well, one of these days we'll see. Hey, maybe even in the upcoming Spider-Man movie. Maybe if that is the Chameleon or something, he'll be wigging out, and suddenly we'll see Hasselhoff show up.
That would be awesome. That's the price of admission right there.
Yeah.
All right, Shane.
I will talk at length about Winter Soldier later.
Yeah, I will as well.
Excellent.
Hint, hint, nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
Mm-hmm. All right.
So Civil War, I mean, I know it's titled Captain America Civil War, but it really, to me, is Avengers 2.5.
Yeah.
With the way they brought everybody together, introducing Black Panther and even bringing in Spider-Man, which, again, with Sony owning the rights for so long, never thought would happen. It was one of those moments, just like in the original Avengers movie, where they all come together that first time in New York City, and they're going around in the circle camera angle, and you see everybody like getting ready to attack. It was just phenomenal to see all of these heroes on screen all at the same time, while following what Tony wanted to do and thought he was doing right, as he always does, and still somehow it gets screwed up a little bit, and Cap taking the opposite point, which again, we who read the stories knew that would happen, but it was still really something to see it happen on the big screen, right as big as life, something that as the movies progressed, I still never thought they would do quite as well as what I was hoping, and it still blew me away.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. It's the movie manages to be, Captain America 3, while at the same time being Iron Man 3.5, Avengers 2.5, Spider-Man 1/2, Black Panther 1/2. It manages to juggle so many different balls, and it all works. It all surprisingly works. I had no idea that would actually be able to be the case, nor that we would get so much and have it still, at its core, feel like a Captain America movie.
And I want to mention some of the great unsung heroes of all this are the screenwriters Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely.
Yes.
Who wrote all the Captain America movies and wrote Infinity War and Endgame. And those two men are a major reason why we enjoy these movies as much as we do. And they just did a fantastic interview on Kevin Smith's Smodcast podcast. It's like a 2-hour episode where they talk about their entire experience. I highly recommend it, writing all these movies. Oh, it's fantastic.
I'll give it a listen.
Yeah.
All right, Kevin.
Well, I went with Avengers Age of Ultron. And the reason being is for a couple of reasons. One of the things that I enjoyed about this film compared to the other Avengers movies, and I can't say that, I should say more in regard to the first Avenger movie. By this time, all the other characters have had their solo first movies, and some plural. So when you get into this movie with the characters, like, I felt the actors really found their niche with their characters, and they're very sound with their interpretations of these characters, and it felt more fluent to me and more congruent. They were solidified as characters, and it felt very natural with their portrayals. And I loved the choice to make James Spader the voice of Ultron. That was phenomenal. And then, the one of the things that I was so charged about, and what made it such a joy, was that they brought in the Vision yet besides, and because obviously you had the inclusion of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. So you're starting to see kind of like what they did in the comics. You had the first Avengers, and they were in for so many issues, and then all of a sudden the team changed, and you had Quicksilver, Scarlet Witch, and Hawkeye, and and I'm like, wow, they're really kind of doing this, and it's such an enjoyable ride, and the interaction between the characters, I thought the story was really good, and I was jazzed about the Vision. That was one of my favorite things about the whole movie. So that's why I picked it above the first Avengers, and first Avengers was great, and I loved Infinity War as well. But when I sat here trying to weigh them all out, and that's why I said I started to nitpick, and to me, I went back and watched them all, and I was like, you know what, I really enjoy watching this film, and for those reasons alone. So that was my reason behind choosing it.
Yeah, Kevin, I can't. I'll go ahead, sir. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just I wholeheartedly concur. Paul Bettany just nailed the Vision. I mean,
my God, yeah.
And the look of the Vision, like they actually had him essentially in a costume, like it wasn't like totally a CGI'd generated character.
Yeah,
right.
And that added so much to the depth and the yearning for humanity in the character. And for me, that was also the most exciting part of that film, was seeing the Vision actually brought to life in a way that worked in a live action film. It was thrilling.
And
absolutely.
And so many things were introduced in this movie that wound up being important later on, like Hawkeye's family for one. Obviously Vision, and also the idea of other Avengers being able to lift the hammer is first introduced here, because that amazing moment with Vision being able to hold the hammer was terrific, and
that party scene was pure Joss Whedon.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
And sorry, and I just wanted to say one more thing, and that's James Spader is fantastic. and he brought a bit of levity to the character of Ultron that I wasn't expecting to find.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say two things. One, I know that Ultron, this version, got a lot of criticism because it's not, what they read. But if you look at the MCU version of who he's based off of, it made more sense with how it was as opposed to the comics. The other thing is, so I guess supposedly now they're potentially rewriting history. Is anyone else convinced that Cap could have lifted Thor's hammer in this, but he kind of chose not to at that moment, or that at that point he wasn't worthy? It wasn't until later that he became worthy.
It's a good question, but yet it's so hard to answer because I don't see any reason why he would not be any less worthy in this film than when he did wield Mjolnir. Spoiler. But going back and watching it again, I even said to Matt, the one time I was talking to him, and I was like, you know what? I watched this movie like 2 or 3 times, and for some reason, well, I know why, because when Steve goes to try to pick the hammer up, and then they cut to the scene where you just see the hammer and Thor in the background. Yeah. My focus went to Thor because I wanted to see his reaction. I wanted to see what would happen, if Steve actually lifted it. And I was watching him. And it wasn't until like the third time I watched a movie and I was like, oh shit, it did move. It moved.
Oh, get out. You didn't know that? Oh, wow.
Yeah, I totally missed it because, like I said, I was focused on Thor's reaction. I wanted to see what his reaction would be because in essence, I was sort of anticipating it. But yeah, I didn't really actually see it move until like the third time I saw the flick, and then.
See, I think I did the opposite. I was so focused on, I know he can wield it. Is he going to? And I saw it nudge, but then kind of missed Thor's first panicked look, and then saw his laughter afterward, and then later saw that he was really panicked at first.
I guess a question to answer your question is why wouldn't he lift it? What would he gain by not lifting it?
I think he wasn't quite worthy yet, and I like the theory going around the internet as to why, and it's the fact that he was holding that secret as to who actually killed Tony's parents at that point.
You see, now I heard the theory that it was because whatever it takes, that he was willing to. He was going to go up to Thanos knowing that he didn't stand a chance, and that's what made him worthy. And I contend Civil War pops up later on my list, so I contend that one thing about the secret. I'm under the impression after rewatching some of that scene again, if you look at how he lifts, kind of like puts up his hands like, oh no, I can't lift it, almost like he. To me, it's like if you do something kind of dumb, you might just go, oh well, hey, it's on me. The expression on his face afterward almost made me think he knew he could do it, but and one of the theories that I read was he didn't want to upstage his Thor basically by showing that he could that he too was worthy. So and that he's I guess he has pride enough to know that I don't need to upstage my teammates by showing who I am. So I'm
obviously
who I am.
That adds to the level of the character. That he'd be like, I don't need to have that ego trip. You know what I mean? He's sound within himself. He's like, I'll just let it go.
It reminded me of there was an issue of G.I. Joe where it was kind of a flashback for Scarlet, where she was kind of getting not harassed, but teased a lot by the original G.I. Joe members because she was the only girl, and even though she grew up in martial arts, she could kick everybody's asses, but the most trained was Snake Eyes, and he basically let her beat him to show how more superior she was. And she knew that he could have easily taken her, but he didn't have he wasn't worried about his own pride. He was trying to prove a point to the other members that, hey, Scarlet deserves to be here. So that's kind of how I interpret this moment, that Steve didn't need to prove to anybody who he is. It was more about letting Thor know that, hey, you're still important. We still need you, type of thing.
Yeah. That's a good analogy, man.
That is a good analogy. Yeah. Yep. I guess hearing those theorems behind, being his quote unquote being worthy. I I kind of like the idea of the Endgame version, whereas, like you said, he was willing to sacrifice it all. He was willing to do whatever it takes. He's willing to go whatever he needed to do. And, and that sort of kind of fits. I don't know, for me anyway.
Yeah.
I kind of like that.
Absolutely.
The only other thing I'll say about Ultron is that movie was never one of my favorites. And I don't necessarily know why. I mean, I love lots of parts about it, but I never rewatched it like I did some of the other ones. However, after seeing Endgame, I started with Iron Man, and I'm watching them all in order again, just whenever I have time.
Wow.
And I'm up to, I just watched Age of Ultron last night. And I have to say, I like it a little bit more than I used to, and I can't really say why, other than the interaction between the characters and certain things that come to fruition later. I liked this version where they're all one team, all fighting together yet before the splintering starts happening. Even though they all come back together, and we kind of all knew that would happen, right here, none of that's happened yet. They're all one team fighting for one reason, to get a hold of the stones, to protect this, to get Loki's staff back. They're all kind of melded together yet. Until they create Ultron and then Vision and all that. But it starts out with them really being a solidified team, joking around, bantering back and forth.
Language.
They just do a great job of it. That I really appreciated it more watching it last night.
And I'll also add, since he hasn't been brought up yet, Quicksilver leaving us as fast as he came.
Oh yeah.
But
You didn't see that coming.
But that's Joss Whedon. He always kills off characters in unexpected ways.
I know. It's his staple. It's his shtick.
Was that because of X-Men going to be using him, or that would have been interesting to have both?
No, I think it was. I think it was just because it served the story. I don't think it was because X-Men was going to use Quicksilver.
Yeah, because otherwise they wouldn't have used him if it would have been some sort of contention.
Right. Yeah. There was
that kind of loophole that they were able to use him.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Joint rights. That's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Chris.
Okay. I'll make this one short and sweet because when I went to see Iron Man for the first time in 2008, obviously I was very excited. Okay, Marvel's doing an Iron Man film. Whoever would have thought they were going to do that? I always enjoyed Robert Downey Jr. as an actor, so I went in. I didn't really have expectations. I didn't know what to expect. I just was excited for it. And I remember I sit in the theater, and they open the film, and he's in Afghanistan, and he starts to talk, and I go, "Holy shit! He's Tony Stark."
Yep.
And I remember thinking, like, okay, this is not what I was expecting. Like, this is a Marvel comic come to life. Like, from that moment when he's talking, like, he brings out, like, the champagne bottles out of the weapon they just tested, and he's bantering with the soldiers in the Humvee before the attack, and, Gwyneth Paltrow was just pitch perfect as Pepper Potts. And Jeff Bridges, one of my all-time favorites, as Stain. And I was floored with how they clearly, like, unlike how many comic book adaptations we see up to that point that never really got to the essence of the characters they were adapting. Most of them, right? Needless changes to the stories. Costumes look ridiculous. We go down the list. We've all been there. And this film, by the end of it, I mean, I was speechless. Like, they totally pulled this off, and this is one of the best up to that point comic book adaptations I've ever seen. And again, I have to emphasize how Robert Downey Jr. I mean, we all know that if we read about his life, in many ways he was born to play this role.
Yeah.
But we can say that, but it still doesn't. I don't want to diminish the fact that he so nails this character. And so much of the rest of these movies, and I'll talk about this more a little bit later, is the arc of Tony Stark and Steve Rogers and how they both develop as heroes in different ways through these movies. And it all starts with this film. And it's not my all-time favorite. It's why I didn't put it as my number one or two, but they started on the right foot and it never stopped. So,
yep.
I agree, and I'll elaborate on it because that's on my list yet.
As is mine.
It's on mine too.
It is, but not my top 5. I'll never forget going in. Meg and I met up with Kevin and his girlfriend at the time, and she had said this is going to relaunch Robert Downey Jr.'s career.
Oh yeah,
and Kev said you're gonna like the first thing you hear in the movie, and it AC/DC. So I was like, oh, Back in Black, I'm in. I guess I didn't read a lot of Iron Man beforehand, so I didn't know if this is actually how he spoke. And I think one of the downsides about the movie is I tried reading some newer Iron Man afterward, and it just seemed like the writers were trying to write Robert Downey Jr. in the comics. But it seems like Robert Downey Jr. doesn't really know what Robert Downey Jr. is going to say until he says it. So it always, anytime I read an interpretation, an impression of him in the comics, it always felt flat because it's like you're trying too hard. I liked reading a lot of the behind the scenes stuff for the movie, how a lot of it was like improvised, and like I guess Gwyneth Paltrow was getting a little irritated initially.
Well, actually, Jeff Bridges was extremely irritated.
That he had to look at it as like a $200 million student film. I saw that because they were writing scripts on the day, but and the infamous, not infamous, but the famous "I am Iron Man" was improved at that moment. So I thought, stuff like that I think was really cool, and I bought that he was actually in that suit. So the effects I thought were outstanding.
And one thing I realized there was some kind of, I don't know if it was a money conflict. And as much as I loved Don Cheadle, I thought Terrence Howard was sensational as Rhodey in that first film.
Yeah.
And when they're on the airplane together, like with the dancers, they so captured like the bond between those two men, the friendship we know from the comic. And I was a little disappointed not to see him continue as in that role, because I thought he really nailed that character so effectively.
Yeah, I agree with you.
In that first film. But yeah, and Jeff Bridges was so chilling. The scene where he takes the power from him, and he says, it's going to be on the right side," and he walks away. And he was great as a villain in that film.
Yeah.
He's a great actor.
The biggest mistake,
one of my favorites.
Biggest mistake Terrence Howard made, Chris, was saying next time, because nope.
Yeah, that was the whole reason why he signed on. He wanted to be Rhodey, War Machine.
Yeah. All right, Shane, remind us what your number 3 was.
Winter Soldier.
Okay. And Kevin.
Iron Man. First Iron Man.
Okay. Matt.
Endgame.
Okay. My number 3, I'm throwing a curveball even for myself. Thor Ragnarok.
Oh.
Ooh.
And Chris.
Mine is Civil War.
All righty. Shane, you want to talk a little bit more about your number 3?
Well, I really loved not only like we all said before, the way Natasha was portrayed in this, and how her character grew. The fact that they brought in Falcon the way they did, which I thought was brilliant. Even in the very beginning when he's running along on your left, it was so spectacular to see them take Captain America and grow him from just being a soldier to now trying to make him a spy, which he was sort of uncomfortable with. And you see that really come through when he finds out Natasha has a totally different mission in the beginning than what he did, and really comes down on Fury for it. And then you get into the whole discussion about, well, this is fear, not freedom. This is really something I'm not comfortable with. I really think it allowed his character to grow beyond just being the frozen World War II hero that saved a lot of people. He was now changing what was going to come next. He's not comfortable with being the spy. He's not comfortable with the way things are run. We've got to expose everybody, and I have to be out in the open. I'm not pleased with everything that's going on here. I don't like this part of S.H.I.E.L.D. anymore. It just blew me away that how they brought Robert Redford in, who really was the big baddie.
Oh yeah.
And really had no clue of that the way it was in the beginning until he orders everybody after Captain America, and he comes into the wardroom where Sharon's questioning, well, if we're going to chase down Captain America, we got to know why. And he flat out says, well, because he lied, he betrayed us, and blah, blah. okay, where did that come from? And all of a sudden you're on this roller coaster of, okay, he's the big baddie now. Something I just never expected.
Well, Shane, one thing that I think you've hit the nail on the head here is that, and why, and I'll talk more about Winter Soldier in a little bit, is that they remind readers and they introduce to new movie viewers that Steve Rogers is not a robotic soldier, simply follows orders.
No.
At his core. You see, Steve Rogers is the essence of what an American soldier is. What does an American soldier swear an oath to? To defend the Constitution, not to defend a president or a government.
Yep.
And they remind us that he's a critical thinker, and it's part of his role, because who is he supposed to be defending? The ideals of this country, not a political party line.
Right.
And the movie really reminds us, or introduces again to new viewers, what the essence of Steve Rogers really is. And they did a magnificent job of capturing that.
Oh yeah. And in fact, I mean, to the point where, you know, a lot of the things that happen with Pierce, you know, reminds me of when, you know, the very, very famous you know, Secret Empire arc with Captain America.
Yes.
You know, when he finds out that you know, the president is actually, you know, evil. You know,
Richard Nixon is number one in the Secret Empire.
Yep. Yeah. So that's you know, this was reminiscent of that. It's like, you know, he has this crisis of conscience and his crisis of faith as to you know, which direction he's going to turn, and decides to, you know, stick exactly where he was, which is, you know, with the American way, as it were.
And not to also forget about things like Gary Shandling, Senator Stern, who was in Iron Man 2, came here, and you find out, oh, Hail Hydra, okay?
Yep.
How you had Sitwell in there, who was just on a few episodes of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Yep.
Yes.
Before all this went down, and all of a sudden, whoop, he's gone because he was part of Hydra.
He was in Avengers, too.
It just blew, he was. It just blew me away, everything they put together in this movie, and it really did not. It was totally a Captain America movie, but it felt like a spy thriller. It did not feel to me overly super heroic.
Yep.
To be flashy and silly. It was as serious as it gets, and the stakes were incredibly high for what was going to happen.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Just as a sidebar, I even though I like seeing Robert Redford in Endgame, I think he was wasted in that movie, and I would have preferred to have seen him in the Captain Marvel movie, maybe like at the very end, coming into Fury's office, you know, referencing that one mission that he went behind the scenes behind his back to do. I think that would have been cooler.
Talking about when he saved people at the embassy,
which I was always under the impression that's how he lost his eye. Instead of a cat, but it was. I think that would have been a cooler cameo as opposed to the one in Endgame.
Yeah.
I think they could have gotten away without putting him in there, and it would have worked. Would have worked all right.
I
totally agree with that.
I also kept wanting to straighten his hair in Endgame, because that wig he was wearing was atrocious. All right, Kevin.
Well, I'm gonna elaborate on Iron Man and briefly do so. I mean, I remember, you know, I remember hearing of the deal that Marvel made with Paramount Pictures to produce their own films, and like Chris had said before, you know, look what we've had before this, you know, and I, you know, I was excited, and when I remember, I think we were discussing it on an episode when they announced Robert Downey Jr. as cast as Tony Stark, and I remember Deemer going like, you know, that's the worst casting ever. And I'm like, you are so wrong. You know, I'm like, you are so wrong. I'm like, this is perfect. And like Chris said, I was like, his life is, he was born to play this role. Like, he has so much to pull from to be able to emulate this character. And I remember watching that movie in the theater, and, you know, from having read a lot of Iron Man prior, you know, Tony was, you know, boisterous and exuberant and all those things, but Robert Downey Jr. just took it to a whole nother level, and he gave him so much more personality and depth, and everything they did with this character. And again, taking a character, you know, that's what and I don't want to get into the whole DC Marvel thing, but I mean, as far as Marvel goes with something like this is their first opportunity to produce their own movies, and they didn't do, you know, like like a Superman or Batman. You know, they went to Iron Man. You know what I mean? A character that, again, most of the populace don't know about. You know, so they rolled their whole bank on basically kind of a B-level character to the public. It's basically could be like a C-level character, but they just nailed it in every aspect. And I think Favreau's decision to use Stan Winston and do more physical visual effects with the armor and stuff like that was a solid choice. Absolutely. That made it more believable and more solid. And everything was just on point. And Downey just nailed the role.
And how great was the Kirby armor in the beginning, by the way?
Yes.
Oh my God! I mean, that's what sold me when I saw when the first time they showed any armor was that Mark I armor, and I was like, that looks so much better than what we saw in Tales of Suspense, and it looks so cool. And I'm thinking, wow, if they're doing that with that, I'm in. I am in. They are on the right path, and obviously they shown they were on the right path, and this is what got the ball rolling. So you have to give credit where credit's due, and with them allowing Downey to improvise, and they were just on the go every day. I mean, basically that's what I heard from behind the scenes. Like every day was just like what are we doing today? And let's start doing it and see what happens. And I know that's why Jeff Bridges got so frustrated, because he's such a professional actor and he's so used to knowing all his lines and being prepared. And it was totally the opposite. So he was frustrated. But I believe that was the key to the success of this movie, is that they let the personalities and let the actors play the roles. And that's what gave them the personality and depth that we all enjoy up to this day. So it's a solid film. It's a fun film. It's adventurous. You get every aspect. You get action, danger, laughter, drama, romance. The whole kit and caboodle. And they drove it all the way home throughout the whole entire movie. So
friends of mine like to throw this one around, Kevin. Jon Favreau made that movie in a cave with a box of scraps.
Excellent. Kevin, when you were saying about they decided to use Iron Man as their first, the MCU beginning. If you think about it, who'd have been the A-list character that they? Well, I mean,
you start thinking about like your A-list Marvel maybe characters, Hulk. but then you have to look and realize that, because of all the misfires prior, all the rights were chewed up.
Yeah.
Right.
So they didn't. It would played in their favor that the rights weren't available, because you could have gone Captain America, you could have gone something else, and you could have used characters that people were more familiar with. And like I said, I just compared it to like DC with they like to focus on Superman and Batman all the time, and it's like there's other characters there, and I'm glad they're starting to do that, and that's why I think it worked in their favor that they didn't have access to like the key mainstream characters that you would think they would go to first, the powerhouse characters that have been the staple of the Marvel universe.
Because
and so they had to go with something else, and they went with Iron Man.
Because I've contend with some DC hardos that when they say the first so many movies that DC put out in their extended universe did way more money than Phase 1 of Marvel, except for Avengers, and I always point out, well, look who Marvel had to work with. Their only A-list character would have been the Hulk, and that came off of the divisive Hulk movie that Ang Lee put out.
Two of them, really, because you had both of them by the time this came out.
No, the second one.
No, that's right. Incredible Hulk came out afterwards. You're right.
That same year, though.
Yeah.
And it's like, Batman, Superman, and then Wonder Woman, I expect if you put movies, those characters in movies, they're going to do a lot of money because, they're probably the three most popular comic book characters globally. And then in the other one, they heavily marketed probably the most famous villain, the Joker, even though he wasn't in that movie that much from what I've been told, so I haven't seen it. But, so it only makes sense that those movies would have made more than Phase 1 with Captain America, Thor, another Hulk, and Iron Man. So,
yeah, it worked in their favor. So. Yep. Definitely did.
Yep. All right, Matt, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I'm just gonna just go back to the other episode. I don't. There's not too much more I want to add, and just to kind of save time. Endgame was amazing how they were able to wrap. I like a lot of the callbacks. Basically, I'm gonna establish this right now. This spoiler. My top 5 have a specific theme. The writers. So expect that with the remaining 2. Marcus and McFeely continue to knock this one out of the park. Of the Avenger movies, it's probably going to be my favorite just because of, like, even though there are certain characters I had issues with, such as Fat Thor, I like what they do, and usually their interpretations of characters, like, for instance, I won't get down that road yet, but I just liked how they were able to kind of bring everything of the last 10 years together, and by going back to previous moments to do that. So if you want more, go back and listen to that episode where we reviewed the movie.
Fair enough.
Cool.
I went with Thor Ragnarok, and I didn't even know I was going to. Mostly because
I'm still wondering why you did.
Well,
Sorry,
Kevin, no, I know. Please, come on. And if you want to know more about that, go ahead and listen to our Endgame episode. But I really enjoy this movie. I was never really sold on the character of Thor in the previous movies, even if I did enjoy the world that they had built. And here I got a Thor I could relate to, a Thor with personality, and a Thor that cracked me the hell up. We'd never really had, outside of Ant-Man, I guess, like a straight comedy. And even this isn't just straight comedy. There are some dramatic moments to the movie as well that really draw me in. But I love the Kirby flourishes that they threw in there when we get onto the planet, incorporating Planet Hulk into the way that they did with Sakaar. I was surprised by how well it worked for me, mostly because I was thinking to myself, we needed a serious Planet Hulk movie, and instead we got something a little less serious, but it worked for me in that level. Introducing Valkyrie was a great move. Korg and Meek were great characters, and just overall, Enchantress, sorry, not Enchantress, Hela. That Enchantress hasn't happened yet. Hela was an interesting move to make her a sister of Thor and Loki. But I think it works overall with the world that they built in the MCU, and gave her a little bit more purpose and drive and dedication in this movie. And plus, Loki too was just better fleshed out, and we got a little bit more of a redemptive arc out of him than we've gotten in the other movies. So yeah, I love it for its style and its personality and its humor, and I'll throw it in there. It's just like Guardians for me. It was something different, and that's why I love Thor Ragnarok as much as I do.
I'll tell you, Ian, I love Thor Ragnarok, and I watch it a lot. My biggest problem with Ragnarok is it's not Ragnarok for me. It's not as doom, as heavy as what I think Ragnarok should be.
Right.
It's a great movie, but after seeing it, I thought, my God, this is so not Thor Ragnarok. It's Thor and Hulk, and in a great movie.
Right.
I just wish they wouldn't have called it Ragnarok, and I'd have been better with it. But I love
totally
it.
Agree.
I absolutely love it.
Yeah, totally agree with you.
I read that the director, to kind of pitch his idea, was he brought in a lot of clips from Big Trouble in Little China, and I love that movie.
I do too.
And it kind of Steve Bryant. That's a nod to you, by the way. But I always look at it as much as I liked Big Trouble in Little China, I had some issues with Ragnarok, and I think that's because they tweaked the comedy aspects to, like, annoying. And that was just too much versus the way it was presented in Big Trouble in Little China. There's some parts that I did enjoy, but some of the humor takes me out of it, that I just think it should have been pulled back a little bit more. But I understand that's Chris Hemsworth wants to go more comedic Thor. And it, to some extent, seemed like a Road to movie.
Right.
But with him and Banner.
Yeah, which is one of the things I love about it is sort of like the buddy aspect of it, like in that way, almost like a Lethal Weapon in space,
Sure.
like having the buddy comedy aspect of it worked really well for me. So, yep.
Yeah.
All right, Chris.
We've already talked about Civil War. Just a couple more comments I'll add is that the Captain America arc is my favorite aspect of all of these movies. And they continue it here, and they also continue the Tony Stark arc. As I mentioned earlier, I love how they, because they established that Stark and Tony and Steve, the two of the sort of the foundational icons of this whole universe and of the Avengers, yet again, the actors have wonderful chemistry, and they really establish how, even though they're both heroic and noble, they're coming from very different perspectives, very different worldviews, very different origins, and that's inevitably they're going to clash. And they capture that so effectively in this film because, you can understand both of where they're coming from. It's not like one's a villain, the other's a hero when it comes to their perspectives. I always come down on the side of Steve usually, but they did a wonderful – and as Shane mentioned, there's a lot of moving parts in this film. And again, it's a tribute to the writers and the Russos. It's so well handled how they bring all those parts into play. You've got everything from, for me, one of the most exciting action sequences of all these movies is when Scott becomes Giant Man on the airport tarmac, and as the two factions converge, you're like, I just saw a splash page come to life. That battle scene is so thrilling in that film, and just again the way, like the scene where Ross, Thunderbolt Ross, comes into the meeting, and Tony's there, kind of like, and Tony has a look on his face like he feels the conflict. He wants his teammates and friends to go along with this, and Steve, and the great scene where he gives Steve the pens that FDR used, and Steve said, I don't want you to have an incomplete set, like give him his pen back, and again, epic stuff's going on, but they never forget character. And that's why Marvel's so great at its best. That's why these movies are so damn good. So it's a great team up film. Like you said, it's so many sequels in one, really, and it's so well handled. The introduction of Spider-Man was thrilling. Just seeing Tony flirt with Aunt May, knowing those actors dated in real life many years ago was fantastic. You're surprisingly attractive aunt. And of course, it's me. So the Black Panther, when he's introduced and they show him in the costume for the first time, when he's running on the road and he's jumping and his boots make no sound because of the vibranium, and they show the Dora Milaje and the whole 9 yards, I was like, my God, they so have all this. And when I left that movie, I was like, okay, I can't wait to see the Black Panther film because I can just tell they're going to nail this. And I'll talk about that more in a moment. But that's my number 3.
I absolutely love with T'Challa and T'Chaka talking in the meeting when they're signing the Accords. That whole father-son moment, of course, sappy me gets me every time. Just a spectacular scene.
And I also loved how they used Zemo in the film.
Yes.
The way they interpreted Zemo. I thought that was a really effective way, because they're not going to have the comic book version of Zemo, but
no.
I liked how he's a traumatized survivor of, and again, the other great theme of the movie I forgot to mention are the consequences of superhero battles. Innocent people die, or they get injured, or their property's destroyed. Even though, and when Tony, is it Alfre Woodard who's the mother?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And she's a great actress.
Black Mariah.
Yeah, exactly. That great little scene where, it comes home to him like, okay, her son died because of what we were trying to do good, but these are the consequences of that. And I think that's a great aspect of the film that shouldn't be overlooked. So that's my number 3.
And then part spinning out of that is Tony's knee-jerk reaction to fix it.
Yes, which is classic Tony.
Yeah.
Tries to fix everything.
Two things
they've been consistent with in every film.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Two things. Marissa Tomei went to my high school, so I need to point that out. She went to Edward R. Murrow High School here in Brooklyn, so she's one of our most famous alumni. And 2, I'm still really hoping Phase 4 has a Thunderbolts film in it because Baron Zemo's still alive.
Yes.
So they could do something with that character. Yep.
That would be awesome.
That would be amazing. All right, here we are with our number 2s. Kevin, start us off.
Civil War.
Great. Chris.
Black Panther.
Yes. My number 2, I'm pulling a Shane. Infinity War and Endgame.
See, I was going to do that, but I didn't. I stayed away.
Pull it a Shane. And speaking of Shane.
Mine's Iron Man.
Okay. And Matt.
I got Civil War.
Nice. All right, Kevin, start us off. Go ahead.
Well, what else can be said? I do want to emphasize exactly what Chris had said. You know, the whole Captain America trilogy is the heart of this Marvel universe.
Absolutely.
You know, all 22 films. Chris Evans just embodies the role and just goes great with everything that he does with it. And actually, you know, the funny and the other point I want to drive home is Marcus and McFeely and the Russos. You know, yes. They are my top 4 Marvel characters, you know, because I've loved everything that they've done, and they approach everything so sensibly and realistic, and they do just like they did back in the early years of the comics. They focus on the characters, yep. and they drive it home, and so I give them, you know, I have nothing but admiration and respect for them, all 4 of them, because they have contributed so much to this MCU. And so positively, and honestly, just something to add. I mean, Civil War was not. I didn't enjoy it as much the first time I saw it. Not that I didn't like it, but I kind of, you know, I was kind of in that mode. I wanted another Captain America movie, not a big superhero team up movie, and but I still enjoyed it. You know, I liked the introduction of Tom Holland and Spider-Man. I obviously liked the Black Panther and you know everything they did well, extremely well, and but that just wasn't what I was looking for when I went in to see it. But the more I watched the movie, in fact, I watched it again on Sunday, and I thoroughly enjoy it. I mean, and, you know, I like the fact that it is all these other characters involved, but yet the still focus is on Steve and Bucky.
And Kevin, how about the scene where, near the end, where Steve admits to Tony that he knew?
Yeah.
I mean, that's such a powerful moment.
Yeah, I mean, you think he's been with that the whole time, and how many times did, you know, Tony dig at him about, you know, especially you see that scene where he brought in FDR's pens, and he's kind of like, you know, Tony finally, you know, says to him, he's like, you know, I haven't heard enough about you, you know what I mean? And you could tell that, you know, he was raised around, you know, his father's admiration for Steve, and, you know, and you know, he keeps going on him like, you know, I could punch you in your perfect teeth. And, you know, you could tell there's tension there regardless of anything else going on. But when you get that element to it yet besides, I mean, it just is a completely different ball of wax there.
This is what I contend. I don't think he knew until after Sam and Cap get him back and have him, you know, locked in that one vice grip, and he says, "I remember everything." Yeah. I've always been under the impression that's when he basically said, because he said, you know, I'm not the only Winter Soldier, so he would have had to kind of give the background of, why isn't he the only Winter Soldier? Yep. Where is Zemo going to be going? So that's the point that I always came to, that's when he told Steve, I'm also responsible for killing.
Well, Matt, I
Tony's
think you're
parents.
right. I think what Steve knew was that Howard hadn't died in a common car accident, that Hydra was actually behind it.
Yeah, right. I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with
that's
that.
The thing. That's how I
understood it, and even after watching it again, I still view it that way, that he didn't know the complete specifics behind it.
Yeah.
But he knew that Tony's parents died because of malicious intent and for other reasons.
Absolutely.
And even in Winter Soldier, when Zola was going through, you know, the origin, you know, the news clippings, at that point I was like, okay, Winter Soldier killed his parents. So at that point I was so in Civil War, when the revelation came out, I was like, okay, so Steve probably always figured Bucky had something to do with the death, but it wasn't until Bucky kind of gave an idea of, hey, this is where Zemo's going. I'm not the only Winter Soldier. This is how there's other Winter Soldiers here, that he actually knew, you know, had confirmation Bucky's the one who killed the Starks.
Yeah.
So And because that's one of the criticisms I read is, well, why wouldn't Steve have said something sooner? He could have avoided a lot of the confrontation. Well, maybe he didn't know until, as things were developing in the movie.
Well, but he even addresses that in the movie.
Yeah.
Because he specifically says to him, I thought I was trying to protect you.
Yeah.
But
And my favorite swerve in the movie is that the other Winter Soldiers don't even matter in the end.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
I know, because I remember watching the movie the first time. I was like, wow, okay, they're really going to have to, it's going to be Steve and Bucky against, and against these other 5 Winter Soldiers.
Yep.
And then, with Iron Man coming in reluctantly, he's going to have to, take their side and fight with them. And then they're going to have to deal with their, personal conflict as well. And I'm like, it never even happened. I was like,
Well, if I can, I guess just piggyback, just because this is my number 2 as well. I guess originally they weren't going to do the Civil War storyline, but supposedly that Feige saw that you're going to have Batman versus Superman, so he's like, okay, we could do that. And one of the videos that I watched on YouTube, kind of comparing what went right with one as opposed to the other one, was, and I completely agree. There was a build-up since the first Avengers. There was always kind of that friction. So it's not like they started the movie and this was something that they completely only introduced in Civil War. There was always kind of some type of tension between Tony and Cap, and it just got developed even further in this movie. The whole thing. I resented you because of my dad always talking to you. So I like the fact that it wasn't pulled out of nowhere. Chris had mentioned about the repercussions of the Avengers. I thought was interesting. Having Cap in the middle. So since Endgame, they had said that if you watch the course of Tony and Steve, Tony starts off as selfish and ends selfless at the end of Endgame. Steve starts off selfless and ends up selfish at the end. I always look at this movie as this is where the 2 points cross.
Yeah.
Because if you look at how, and this is another thing I saw, is Tony's not the same as he was, in Iron Man 2, it was, you can't have my tech. Whereas in this one is he's willing to go up with the government. And he actually says to Steve, I always, if I do this, this will be enough. And then this, and then this. And maybe this is a compromise with Pepper that if I join up with the Accords type of thing. And I look at, he had just gotten to this point where he kept trying to be, a lone gunman type of thing and realized that it's not going to work. I need to work with the government or else they're just going to take it from me. And that kind of propelled his course to where he winds up in Endgame. And also with Steve being in the middle between his best friend, his initial best friend, and now his current really good friend, he's caught between the two, and now their course kind of crossed, and Steve goes to where he winds up. So I did like, I like that. I liked also how, I remember going in, there was discussion of Steve's going to die in this movie because that's how it is in Civil War. And that basically the writers and directors said, no, everyone was expecting him to die. So we didn't kill him. And if he died, there'd be no repercussions for what happened in the movie. It's essentially the end of that story. So by keeping him alive, the next movie with Cap, there's going to be repercussions for not signing the Accords, just like there was in this movie. So I thought that was neat how most people were going in with one expectation and they knew that, so they just didn't do it that way.
Yeah. And it was a smart move in general. I mean, it really did continue, Cap's entire arc with, no longer being able to trust his government and at the same time not being able to trust, anybody really telling him what to do. He knows what is right for him, and he's going to do that. And it was a smart move.
One thing that always kind of stood out to me with this movie is that, the whole thing with the Accords and the way they handled it, with having that United Nations meeting, council meeting to sign the Accords, and that's where T'Chaka dies. And obviously Wakanda and T'Chaka and T'Challa are for the Accords, which means the Accords obviously means they have to, these superpowered beings have to, answer to this entity from the United Nations. And then throughout the whole rest of the movie, Black Panther's like, well, I'm doing what I want. I'm going after the Winter Soldier myself. So it's almost like a hypocrisy, as a character. I'm like,
yeah.
You're for the Accords, but when it comes down to what you want to do, it's like, well, I'm just going to do what I want to do anyway. I don't have to answer to the Accords. So it's
this is something that always bothered me. First of all, I thought Spider-Man has been written the best outside of his solo movie, and this was a good example. I was more on board seeing Spider-Man in this movie than I was at the end of Homecoming.
I agree.
But if Peter sided with Tony's fraction, wouldn't he have had to sign the Accords and essentially reveal his identity to operate with them? And shouldn't that cause Tony to have some type of pause, knowing that now Peter could potentially at some point be used by the government
or anybody?
Or anybody. The UN organization. And just another quick thing, I like the fact that they finally brought back Thunderbolt Ross.
Yes.
To kind of connect that Incredible Hulk is a part of this.
Oh, yeah.
One of the comment I would make before we move on, because Kevin makes an interesting point about the way T'Challa is acting in this film. I think what's going on there, and they establish this with the scene at the very end when they're in Wakanda, is they're setting the audience up for the fact that the Black Panther and his nation is so powerful that if he feels that, and he's always kind of a master unto himself and his motives and why he does what he does for the sake of his nation, I think he came to realize that it was in the interests of his own people that he sided basically with Steve and Bucky ultimately when it came to, and plus he realized when he prevents Zemo from killing himself.
Right.
Yeah.
And he realized that, okay, I was going down the wrong path, because he saw himself in Zemo and that I'm going down the wrong path here. And I forsake the vengeance. And then he realizes, well, the person I really need to support here is Steve. Yeah. And that's an important point, because if you go through the comic history, T'Challa and Steve are always very close allies.
Yes.
Throughout their entire history. So that's an important point.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, Chris.
Okay, so two things actually, gentlemen, because I have to bolt because I got to deal with my son. So I'm going to kind of just shout out my 2 and 1 and talk a bit about both, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Is that all right? I appreciate it.
Please do.
So, all right, Black Panther. As we all know, and as many listeners know, I am a drooling Black Panther fan, especially of the Don McGregor and Christopher Priest versions of the character. So my expectations for this film were extremely high. I really loved what I saw in Winter Soldier. I thought Boseman was perfect in the role. I was hearing good things about the script. I already really enjoyed Michael B. Jordan in Creed. And, of course, as a kid, he was in The Wire. So I had high expectations. And my only concern was, okay, if they incorporate the best elements of the comic stories, especially the 2 writers I mentioned, this is going to be a great movie. And Ryan Coogler's the director, right? Is it Ryan Coogler? Okay, so
correct.
Going into the film, and I remember sitting there, I went with Ryan, sitting there watching the movie, and within a matter of minutes, I almost wept, because I was like, this is it. Like, when they show Wakanda, and like, the subterfuge where you think it's like this third world country, and I won't use the term that our beloved president uses to describe African nations, but this whole subterfuge of what Wakanda really is, and they show like the central city and the technology, and I was just, this is amazing. Like the dedication to detail in that film, and I'm glad the costume designer won an Oscar, because holy mackerel, was it well deserved. But every facet of Wakanda that I have been reading and loving for years, they put it all on the screen. The different aspects of the society, the tribes, the history, and the way they use the opening scene where Killmonger's father tells the history of Wakanda, and they had that great effect where they show like Wakanda through the history of humanity, and when they showed the different tribes gathering for the ritual where he fights the man-ape, M'Baku, and everything about the movie, like they bring in the spiritual element of Bast, and when he goes into the spiritual realm to see the different panther gods and the previous kings, and they went all in. Like they didn't shortchange anything. They didn't try to like toned down aspects of the comic book character or his world. This movie was so reverent to that world and so captured the essence of what makes the Black Panther such a compelling character. And they relied so heavily on the McGregor and the Priest interpretations of the character. It was, whether it was Ever K. Ross or, you know, the politics of Wakanda. But as Shane mentioned, I think it was Shane, forgive me if it wasn't, Michael B. Jordan truly understood Killmonger. Because when you read Killmonger, in the comic too, he is a sympathetic character that you can kind of see where he's coming from. And, you know, there's real depth to that character because he was created by Don McGregor. And that was brought to the screen. And in many ways, he steals the film. And with the way that character is portrayed, he really should. But again, the Dora Milaje and Chadwick Boseman, because Chadwick Boseman had in many ways had the toughest role because T'Challa is so restrained in so many ways because he has to be. And I think they really explored that wonderfully as well. But it's one of the greatest, most reverent adaptations of a comic book I've ever seen. The look of it, the style, the spirit, the characters, I revere it.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. 100% agree.
So
I actually found T'Challa to be maybe the third most interesting character in the movie because Killmonger, which I found out afterwards, Michael B. Jordan had to go for therapy after the role just because of the thoughts that he had to get in that mindset. He had and then M'Baku. I mean, I thought he was awesome as well. I look forward.
I'm
to
just kidding. We're vegetarians.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It is, and I'm just going to shout out my number one. I apologize. I got to go. But
that's
obviously, it's Winter Soldier, and everything that we've already said about it, I concur wholeheartedly. I think why this movie is my number one is that it was the first Marvel movie that transcended the genre for me.
Yeah.
In that I sat back and went, wow, they're not kidding around here. Like,
yeah,
this is not just, I mean, this is the comic book, but they're doing like a 1970s spy film. And by the way, Robert Redford is one of my all-time favorite actors. And he's in two of the great conspiracy movies of the 70s, All the President's Men and 3 Days of the Condor.
Mm-hmm.
And to put him in the villain role, which he usually doesn't play, was so effective. And this is the first Marvel movie that, like I said, it just floored me because I realized, wow, that they're taking this whole universe in directions I never anticipated they would do with these films. And again, as we said, they really took pains to establish that Steve Rogers, again, it's his arc, right? Is not only is a man out of time, he is not a man who will walk lockstep with the dictates of a governing power. If he feels that at his core of his being, it's wrong and it's harmful to the nation and the ideals of the nation, he's pledged to defend. And they, like you guys said, the scene where he goes to Nick Fury, this isn't freedom, this is fear.
Yeah.
And you know, they beautifully capture that aspect of his persona. And like you guys said, it is the best Black Widow performance of all the movies, hands down.
Yep.
The scene where they're driving in the car to New Jersey, and she's talking about basically what her life is like as a spy.
Yeah.
And what she does. And it's such a quiet moment. It's so well written by Marcus McFeely, and it's so well acted by Scarlett Johansson. And I hope when they do this prologue film, they go far more into that because they need to show us what the Black Widow really was. Why there was so much red in her ledger, as she put it. Yeah. Basically. But plus, as an aesthetic point, I love it when she has the long red hair because that's just the Black Widow to me, and that's what she had in the film. But,
Agreed.
But they established their relationship and how loyal they are to each other and how she really reveres him, because I've always felt like he like Steve Rogers, his friendship is her redemption in many ways. Like he knows what she is because she's an assassin basically, right? Yeah. And he because it's Steve, right? And he embraces the potential she has, which you see then carried out throughout Endgame. But their dynamic is so well done. And the way they bring Sam Wilson into this movie, like Shane said, when they show it, like when they're on the mall and Steve's running, and I remember when they start talking, I'm in the theater going, man, like they just got Sam Wilson in one scene.
Yeah.
How good is the writing in this movie?
Yeah.
And how perfectly cast is Anthony Mackie, and you believe their friendship right away when Steve goes to the VA, wherever it is where Sam's running. I love how they make, like in the 60s, Sam's the social worker, so they update it. Now he's like a counselor for veterans. Perfectly done.
Yeah.
And you believe right away how good a guy Sam Wilson is, how selfless he is, and how loyal he's going to be to Steve. And the chemistry between them is so well done in that film, as it is with Black Widow as well. And the casting is pitch perfect. The writing is pitch perfect. And after that movie, I knew, I said, all right, eventually he's going to be Captain America, because they've so perfectly captured the nobility of the Falcon. The last thing I'll say is, this movie has the most thrilling combat scene in all of the MCU films. When he's fighting the Winter Soldier on that freeway, that combat scene is freaking amazing. I mean, the choreography in that scene, like when Bucky's like flipping the knife from one hand to the other, and like Steve's like rolling with the shield and against the van, and I mean, it is a thrilling hand-to-hand combat scene. And you realize how dangerous the Winter Soldier is in that scene. And you guys also another great point, Nick Fury, bam, in this film, because they capture again the shades of gray of the character. And when he's like in Steve's apartment, like he's wounded, sitting in the chair, and the record player's playing, and and again, Steve is uncomfortable with Nick's world of espionage, as you guys mentioned. To me, this is, for me, far and away the best of all the Marvel films, because it's more than a Marvel film. It's a great movie.
Yes.
Period.
Exactly.
Yep.
And go ahead.
So I was just going to say, if I recall correctly, I believe the music at the end of Endgame where Steve and Peggy are dancing to is the same record.
It's what Fury plays.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even catch that. Good point.
Yeah.
Man.
Oh, wow.
It's totally what Fury plays.
And last little thing I say is the attention to detail. All the books in Steve's apartment. He's trying to catch up to the 21st century. And, of course, the great list, you see Star Trek on it and Star Wars and Nirvana.
Sure.
And, and then, they're playing the great Marvin Gaye song Trouble Man in the hospital. And Sam is there when he wakes up. It's no one else. It's Sam. And, it's I got to watch it again, goddammit. Because
It's a great movie.
That is one that I get Shawshanked on.
Yeah.
That anytime it's on, no matter what I'm doing, it's like, well, now I got to watch the end of this.
Yeah.
All right, brothers, I got to run. I got to do some stuff with put my younger son to bed. He has to do some chores and all this. I won't bore you with the details. But carry on, of course, with great grandeur. Thank you so much. This is a wonderful topic. And thanks to the listener. I forgot who it was who recommended this a couple years ago.
Yep.
So great
Cool.
stuff.
Thanks, Chris.
All
All right, brothers, take care.
See
We'll
you,
talk
Chris.
soon.
Take care,
Take it
Chris.
easy.
Yep, bye.
So I got to add two things to Civil War real quick. One being I spent the entire movie waiting for Robert Redford to take his face off and be the Red Skull underneath.
I did as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. That thought crossed my mind.
I'm not upset that it didn't happen. But that was definitely. I felt like they were telegraphing it, and then they didn't actually do it. So it was almost like having blue balls at the end of the movie. But whatever, it is what it is. The other thing, I love that they changed that list depending on which part of the world the movie was playing in. So the list with Captain America's things that he needs to learn is different depending on what region you're watching the movie in.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I don't know that either.
Yep. Yeah, there's at least 5 or 6 different versions of the list, depending on
that's
on
cool.
which country you're in. So, good times. All right, so Matt, you said you're number 2 already, correct?
Correct. It's Civil War.
All right, right on. So yeah, I pulled a Shane because once upon a time the movies were called Infinity War Part 1 and 2. So to me, they belong in the same position on the list. That they are a complete story. Like you get Infinity War, you get Endgame together, you finish out the Infinity War arc, and they really do belong as one unit. And I will totally sit down and watch these movies as one 5.5 hour movie at some point because clearly
Agreed.
I hate myself and don't want to go to the bathroom. But I adore every single thing that they set up and executed in this culmination of an epic saga, and we really got that in these two movies. We got we got the beginning and end of Thanos' arc throughout the course of the different phases. This was the end in every single way. We got the end of Iron Man's arc. We got the end of Captain America's arc. So many brilliant things were introduced in this. And some epic fight scenes, some beautiful special effects. They pulled off Thanos and he felt like a real person as opposed to just a CGI effect, which was very important considering that he's, the main villain of the piece and one of the main characters of the entire thing. Nobody felt like an ancillary character throughout these movies. Everybody felt important, and it fills me with joy watching these damn things. Like, the cliffhanger at the end of Infinity War, then leading on to how it ended and where we wound up at Endgame, just all makes perfect sense for me. And it has to sit there on my number 2 because I will watch these movies over and over again, and it's the closest to an Avengers comic book to me out of anything that we've gotten. Like, we've gotten Captain America comic books on the screen. This is an Avengers comic. Like, you could see George Perez drawing like the culmination of everybody fighting against Thanos and his army. Like, that's clear in my head. So that's my number 2, even if it's a cheat.
And that's okay. It's a good cheat.
We'll accept it.
Good. Thank you. It's one of the few times I've cheated, damn it. All right. And Shane, you're number 2.
So mine's Iron Man, and we've said a lot about Iron Man already on the show, but a couple things that I wanted to add was when you first see Tony from the perspective of inside the helmet, blew me away. Mm-hmm. With all the heads-up display and turning his head, and everything's following him just as it would inside the armor. I thought it was just a brilliant way to do that. What this movie did for me was the same thing as seeing the very first Superman. I believed a man could fly in a suit that he created. I could believe Superman could fly the way they did it back in 79. I really could believe that this was a suit that could be fully produced, and they just got it 100% right. From start to finish, from the acting, from casting Robert Downey Jr., as we've all already said, everything about this movie just screamed, I cannot believe that Marvel did something this perfect, and here we go on this exhilarating ride from here on. Now, at that time, we had no idea where they were going other than to say, hey, this is the first of a lot of movies that are going to come out. That's great. Now, in hindsight, for this to be the impetus of an entire movie universe for Marvel was absolutely brilliant. And I applaud John Favreau and Robert Downey Jr. and anybody who was involved with getting it made and convincing the studios that this is the way they had to go because it's what's going to propel everything to the next level.
Yep. And it started things off exactly the way that they needed to, And
I'm not convinced that they knew that that's what they were doing when they made it, because this one and then Hulk came out like we said right after, and then there was a year 2009 had nothing.
Yep.
And then 2010 was Iron Man 2, and that's really where it started. But they did it in such a way that it made sense, even if it wasn't intended to be the beginning of a 20-some movie universe. It was still a damn good movie, all on its own.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and in fact, we know that they didn't plan it ahead of time because they had to film that Incredible Hulk mid-credits scene after the fact.
Okay.
That was not planned. In fact, even the Avengers Initiative scene was the last thing they filmed because they didn't know if they wanted to do it or not. And then eventually they went ahead and decided that this is the way to go to try and build something. And when that went off as amazing as it did, then they went ahead and built and filmed Iron Man's cameo in the Incredible Hulk, and then we went forward from there. So. Yeah,
it's just incredible.
Oh, yeah.
I was thinking about it with Robert Downey Jr. 22 movies, 11 years, and he was in at least a movie every year except 2009 when they did none, and I think there was one other year that he wasn't in one, but every other one he's in some part. It might have been a cameo or a bigger part, or it was his own movie, but that's pretty hard to do, that many movies in such a short amount of time.
Absolutely. Yeah. He's a workhorse. He absolutely is. Plus he likes making money, that too.
Well, yeah, that doesn't hurt.
Yeah. How many times was his contract redone?
Oh my God!
Oh, yeah,
yeah. No, I mean, again, once upon a time, Terrence Howard was the highest paid person in Iron Man, which is the reason why he was not in Iron Man 2, and they certainly corrected that for future movies. All right, here we are with our number ones, and I'll just go out and say it that my number one is Iron Man. So. There we go with that. I decided to keep myself going with what I had originally planned for most top fives when I talk about Marvel movies, and it's sticking with that. Matt, what's your number one?
Well, I'm going to stick with the complete set of Marcus and McFeely and go with Winter Soldier.
Nice. Kevin, your number one.
Winter Soldier.
Awesome. And Shane?
And mine's Infinity War.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's hard for me to not pick Iron Man as number one, just because, again, we would not be sitting here right now talking about our top 5 MCU movies without Iron Man. It set the standard. It set us on this road, and again, you guys, we've talked about it so much on this episode already, but that Downey is fantastic. The ensemble cast all worked brilliantly together, and it crafted a story that was both at the same time being so comic book and yet so real and grounded that it just completely blew away every single expectation I could have possibly had for the damn thing, and it proved that this was possible. That it was possible to have a full universe and to not just have a movie that you went and saw that was based on a comic book where you went, yeah, that was pretty good, and then walked out of the theater and, left it as it is. I mean, the Raimi Spider-Man movies are great, but they were their own thing.
The first two.
Yes, the first two. Yeah, hey, there's parts of 3 that are decent, just not the whole thing.
The first half.
Yeah, exactly. although nothing will ever beat me and Rafa and Raf Suhu walking down the street after the movie doing the Spider-Man dance. That was good times. But they set the standard, they set their goals high, and they met every single one in spades. So it's a damn good movie, and it deserves to be number one on my list. So, there we go.
Cool.
All right.
Well, just before we go, I just to talk a little bit more about Winter Soldier. I know we discussed it to death, but just kind of walk around a little bit. In my opinion, the first 22 movies, the Captain America trilogy is probably the most solid of all the trilogies we've seen. I think part of that is you essentially have the same directors, at least for the back two. You have the exact same writers throughout the entire run. One of the biggest criticisms I read early on is you don't have any iconic theme music. So everyone, when they hear Elfman's Batman, you know who it is. Williams' Superman, you know what it is. Bond, you know what it is. MCU, people don't know. But I think the Avengers also follows this. They use the same conductor or composer. So it's Alan, I want to say Silvestri, but I don't think that's
Silvestri,
right. Yeah. Okay, so he did Avengers, he did First Avenger, he did Infinity War, and he did the Endgame. Then you have, I think it's Henry Jackson, who did Winter Soldier. Then he also did Civil War. So you do have some type of continuity. So music-wise, that's another feather in the cap, pun intended, of those movies, is there is consistency with the music. I know I really liked the themes of Iron Man, but they didn't bring back that composer for any of the other movies. Strangely enough, I don't know if you saw Pacific Rim. That composer does the music for Pacific Rim. First time I heard the movie before I watched it, I was like, wait a minute, is this Iron Man? Because there's some certain portions of their theme that sound exactly the same.
Yep.
But so to me, the reason why I got to put Captain America trilogy in my top 5 is because, like I said, it's the most solid of all the trilogies that we've seen in the MCU thus far.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, and I have that da, 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 in my head at all times. So that's that's the most iconic theme for me in all of the MCU. I think it sticks out for me. Kevin, you got anything to add on your number one?
Well, I mean, I guess we've touched upon it a couple times. So the one thing I can embellish is that my experience was I remember sitting in the theater watching Bourne Identity, and I'm watching this movie, and like especially in the scene in the diner when he's like, oh, do you have how many cars in the parking lot? Their license plate, how many exits are, da 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 da. And I'm sitting here watching that, going like, this is what I want in a Captain America movie. This is the kind of feel I want in a Captain America movie. Which at that point, we've only had the one that Albert Pion did. But so I just was like, wow, if I want a Captain America movie, I want it to feel like this, and when I saw Winter Soldier, I got that feeling again, and I was like, they did it. They captured all those essences of what makes the character, and again, embellished upon it, and even made it better, in my opinion, to some extent. And I agree with Chris's comment wholeheartedly, is that it isn't just a genre film superhero movie. It's a great film, and I can watch it anytime, and I thoroughly enjoyed it every time I watch it. It's just a great movie. They just did so much with it and so well with it, and all those different levels with the espionage and the spies, and everything was just a beautiful bowl of soup. It was everything tasted great. So,
one of the things I'll always remember about the movie is we were doing the review, because that came out in 2014,
right?
And you were on that, Kev, and you had asked the question: did Jamie get to see this before he passed away? And I believe it's the last MCU movie he got to see before he passed away.
Yeah, I made the comment in there saying I'm glad he got to see that.
Yeah.
Before he passed, because with him being the fan of the character as he was, I mean, to see that, I mean, you saw it. You saw it all. So.
Oh yeah.
And I remember when Meg and I were kicking around names for our son, and that was one of the moments that I thought of when I suggested Evan for Chris Evans. And part of that is kind of a nod to Jamie being a Cap fan, and that some of the other variations of Captain America and Steve Rogers we couldn't use because of family members or because we didn't really like. But Evan is what I threw out there, and she liked it. So that moment of what you're saying, thinking of Jamie and this movie, kind of brought all that at the same time when I was like, well, what about Evan?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, all those elements were I agree.
Sure.
That's a really cool way of going about it, and a great perspective, and a way to embellish on it just like they did. You taking it to a different element, and that's awesome.
And I love him having to like jump from like helicarrier to helicarrier, and then having that fight scene is just it's freaking brilliant. Episode 1475, by the way, for any of you wanting to listen to our the Winter Soldier movie review. Episode 1475.
Wow.
Awesome.
Yep. All right, and Shane, go ahead and roll us out.
Infinity War, for me, and I agree with you, Ian, I almost did the same thing where it's really one movie, the entire Infinity War Endgame. But Infinity War in particular, for me, has become something that I can watch, and so many of these can, but I can watch that at any time. I just throw it on my phone, throw it in a DVD player, whatever it is, and I get enthralled in it. I intend to just sit there and watch a couple minutes and then go do something while it's playing in the background, and I never make it. It's always so visually spectacular watching all these different facets of all these different characters come together, all the interactions from the moment you're in New York after Hulk crashes into this Sanctum Sanctorum, and from that point on, you're on a roller coaster, and everybody ends up where they are, and everybody gets to battle Thanos, and nobody can do anything about it. and the inevitability of it still happens, and they lose, and you're heartbroken at the end of it. And then you get into the end game, which is spectacular unto itself. But the way Thanos looks, the way that they did the effect with the machinery that was around his head as he was acting to portray that character, the way his face comes through in Thanos is just incredible. The way they bring Captain America and shows up to help save Vision from part of Thanos' team. Just so many different aspects of this movie are just beautifully done, and you really think, man, maybe there's a chance, maybe they will pull it off, and maybe the next part will be something else. Maybe they'll win. They could. They're close. No, they lost.
How great is that line that Cap gives? We don't trade lives.
Yeah.
Division. I mean, that got it brought up again a little bit later, and I was like, man, that's Cap seems to have those moments in these movies that it's a rallying speech or just was like one bit line that you're like,
oh yeah,
I could get behind this guy. I'll run through a brick wall.
As it absolutely should be.
Yeah, he's the anchor of the team, and so every time you can count on him to have that position, and you can always go to him, and that's the character.
And I love things that happen even when they get to Avengers base and Rhodey's there having the holographic meeting with what's his name? Oh my
Thunderbolt
God.
Ross.
Thunderbolt. And he's like, it's only because you're calling them criminals that they're criminals. Even Rhodey is now to the point where he's kind of turning his opinion to rally behind Cap and hey, Tony's missing now as of just a few minutes, and we've got to do something because you're not going to be able to do anything about it, Ross.
Yeah, it's character, good character growth and
yeah.
Oh yeah, and I mean everything builds upon what happened directly beforehand, and that's what I love about all this stuff is that nothing is ever a throwaway. If a character does something in the movie before, it's going to reflect how they are in the next movie. And that's absolutely the case with Cap and with Rhodey and with Tony and with everybody here. And that's what makes Infinity War so grand, is that everything culminates together into this perfectly delicious meal, and it just works on so many different levels.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I one of my favorite things is still the interaction between Doctor Strange and Tony Stark.
Oh yeah. Yep.
I mean, again, talked about characterization. You take a character that's been around for 10 years and then a character that's been around for 2 years, and he's right there with him, bantering and not buying his bullshit, and it was just fun. It was fun to watch.
Yeah, it sure was.
The only thing I didn't like is that there's a missed opportunity to hear "No shit, Sherlock" by one of them.
That's what I thought too. Some kind of reference in that way. Yeah.
Cumberbatch was against it. Cumberbatch was against it. That's the entire reason it didn't happen. Yeah. They brought that up.
Interesting.
Yeah, they brought that up at one point, and he thought that would have been too stupid. It would have been too throwaway.
Huh.
I wonder if in hindsight he wished that he would, because I was reading that Karen Gillan wished she would have put a couple more Doctor Who references into Endgame. So I wonder if, looking back, if Cumberbatch would have been like, yeah, I guess we could have thrown that in there.
Who knows? I mean, I continue to say I love the fact that both sets of Sherlock and Watson are in the MCU.
Yeah.
Now. Yep.
I also get a kick out of Bilbo and Gollum having scenes together.
Yes.
Yeah. What was it? I saw an interview with I forget the name of the actor who plays Ross, but he said something like, we were known as the Tolkien white boys on set.
Yep.
I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah.
I love that nickname. All right. Any alternates or that we want to throw out there and give honorable mentions to, or are we good to go?
I think with having to try to hone this down to 5, I'm kind of like I'm comfortable with my 5, and I don't want to go beyond that.
Can I propose that after Far From Home come out, that we do numbers 10 through 15 to make it more interesting. Just to see.
We should just list them.
Yeah, right.
Well, I mean, we could do that, but I just think, to me, that's a harder one because I feel like once you get close to the top 10, I think there's a huge drop off before you get to the next, say, 5.
You're right.
I think the bottom 5, for the most part, are easy, at least for me, are easy. It's kind of 15 through like 9. That's kind of, I shouldn't say 15. I guess like 17 through 9. That seems to be more of the questionable of, well, how much more is this better than that one type of thing. I think there's some mediocreness in there that.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard for me not to put Avengers or Civil War in my list. I mean, I knew it would be well covered, but by you guys, it's just it's totally what I'm feeling in this particular moment, which is the case with all these top 5s.
And this was the first time Avengers wasn't in my top 5.
Yeah. Yep.
I forgot to bring this up because it's one of my favorite scenes in the entire movie, Civil War, when he pulls down the helicopter.
Oh, yeah.
There's just something about that scene I've watched over and over, just that 2-minute bit that just amazes me just to see. And I wonder if Cap in the comics is that strong. But I just think that was perfectly shot. I bought that entire sequence.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
That and the other sequence I totally bought was Tony Stank. I have mail for Tony Stank.
Yeah.
That's Robert Downey Jr.'s favorite memory of Stan Lee.
Man.
That is one of my favorite cameos of his. Yeah,
that's great.
That is great.
All right, guys. I think we
did it.
We did it, and we shot our bolt, and I think we did a damn good job of it.
I agree.
Well, thanks again for joining us, everybody. And I think there's no better way to end this than Shane. You ready?
Yep.
All right.
Visit us at comicgeekspeak.com to send us an email. The address is comicgeekspeak@gmail.com. If you leave a voicemail, the number is 267-702-6642. Stop by thecomicforums.vanillacommunity.com and let us know your top 5s, and please don't scream at us for ours. And comment on this. Well, I just said that. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook. Thanks to everyone who contributes to the episodes and supports us. We appreciate it. And as always, we are uniting the world's mightiest heroes, one listener at a time.
You got it on Wednesday, and you was talking about it going to the volume up. These guys will talk about it, everything that geeks love. From cakes to laser beams, opinions like the seasons and